Jean Lemon and Tafelmusik performing the music of Joseph Boulogne. You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. Today, two outstanding musicians join the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, each bringing their own unique musical perspectives and sounds. The cellist and composer Chris Dirksen presents a genre-defying new concerto in which traditional is woven together with the contemporary, and violinist Aisslinn Nosky conducts music of the Baroque and classical eras, bringing fresh ideas and plenty of life to music from centuries ago. This morning, Aisslinn has joined me in the studio. Hello.
Good morning.
Well, what a pleasure it is to have you back in the Classic 107 studio and back in Winnipeg. Welcome back to town.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the beautiful weather. I appreciate the sunshine very much.
Well, I had everything to do with that, so so you're welcome. You know, we just heard an outstanding Tafelmusik recording, and we were chatting as that was going to air. You're on that recording, aren't you?
Yeah, that was one of the first projects I did with Tafelmusik, actually. It brings back really wonderful memories. I think someone became ill quite suddenly in the orchestra, and I got the phone call, "What are you doing tomorrow? Would you like to come and be on this recording?" And I was very nervous, but I ended up having a great time, and that recording really brings back fun times.
And what a fun recording it is. I mean, those Boulogne symphonies are just, they're something else. And we're going to be chatting more about that a little bit later in this conversation. But let's chat more about being back in Winnipeg. You've made plenty of appearances here in town, apart from the times when, you couldn't make appearances, and none of us could make appearances, serving as MCO, guest artists in residence. I imagine that gives you a sort of advantage when you come back to Winnipeg, right? You've developed this rapport and relationship with the musicians and players?
That's one of the most special things about my relationship with Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, I think, is that I've really gotten to know the players over the years and the administration too, and it feels like returning to old friends rather than I enjoy working with new groups, but there's always a challenge to usually we have limited time, limited resources to make great music happen, so it can be hard to get to know people very well when you put the music first. You want to make a great concert happen, but we've had time to socialize and get to know each other here, and it feels it's very special.
Yeah, very special indeed. I was kind of reflecting on your past performances, and I was thinking about it because we've been fortunate enough to see you not only alongside the outstanding musicians of the MCO, but also some great guest artists like flute player Claire Chase and violist Max Mindell, and now you're sharing the bill with Chris Dirksen. I'm curious, have you and Chris ever worked together before? Do you have a previous relationship?
Yeah, I met Chris a few years ago when my string quartet, the Eibler Quartet, commissioned Chris to write us a quartet. And we also worked together. We were both teaching on faculty at the BAM Center for the Arts.
That's right.
And Chris remains one of my absolute favorite composers and musicians working today. She's also very cool and fun. So we always have a really good time when we collaborate. It's really special to get to have her here.
So let's talk about this work, Spider Being. You're going to be involved in the premiere then, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be playing and conducting, a little bit of conducting, mostly playing, and Chris is soloing, and it's just a fantastic piece. I'm really excited about it coming together tonight, actually. I can't wait to get to it.
Can you tease it a little bit for us? Like, what can audiences expect to hear?
Yeah, well, it's got 3 different movements, sort of like a traditional concerto, but that's, I think, about all that's traditional about it. We have a string group, a cello. Chris is playing solo cello, and she has she'll be amplified. The rest of us won't be, and she'll be using her fancy looping pedals, which I'm very jealous of, but probably I would have no idea what to do with. So she has a lot of fantastic, sounds that she can make with them and effects that she can do. And then there's 2 prominent. I would almost say the horn parts are kind of other soloists in the texture. And it's really a remarkable soundscape that Chris manages to create, I think.
Yeah, soundscape, and also joined by hoop dancer Shane Spence, who's going to be performing as well. So, I mean, just really something that you'll want to be in the audience for.
Oh, yeah,
a really unique moment, certainly. Yeah. You mentioned you're going to be playing and play conducting is this term I keep using. And if anyone's driving in their car right now and listening and thinking, play conducting, what is play conducting? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, it's actually something that I didn't invent, and I think lots of people are doing it these days. But actually, the roots of it are in the 18th century and 17th century. That the term concertmaster is now used to refer to the first violinist of an orchestra, the person who's a go-between between the conductor and the rest of the string section, I would say. But in the 18th century, it really meant master of the concert, like the boss. Usually, often the person who is also the administrator. Famously, Haydn was a concertmaster, and Mozart, in fact, his first job was on violin. So the role in the past was not only to play the violin, but to direct things, manage traffic flow, let's say. And so the violin is an instrument that I think visually lends itself to that, because people sitting far away, for example, people sitting far away from me, like a horn player, can see when I'm going to play, because they can even if they can't hear me because they're sitting 20 feet away, they can see my bow. And so they can visually watch how I'm going to make a sound, and they can follow that. So that's what I mean by play conducting, is that I'll be playing the violin and also at the same time trying to help people know what's going on.
And if anyone hasn't witnessed it in person, I feel like you're the person to see, because it is so captivating. Aisslinn, I have to say, watching you do this, you bring so much energy to the stage, and I feel like you do such a good job communicating that, like, even me as an audience member, I want to get involved in the music when I see you up there. So really, you do it so well, and this is something that you do plenty of with the Handel and Haydn Society in Boston, of which you are concert master. And as we were just talking about earlier, you were a longstanding member of Tafelmusik. Now, both of those ensembles are historically informed. They're period orchestras in which musical authenticity, I do with the air quotes, is sought through the use of instruments and believed practices of the age. Let me ask you this then. How do you go about approaching this music with a non-period ensemble like the MCO?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Well, all I need, I think, to enter into a sound world that's convincing to play when we're playing 18th century music, I think all I need is interest and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Because one of the most wonderful things about playing music from the 18th century is that we actually have no idea what it actually sounded like. We're just we're making the most educated guess we possibly can. And so there's lots of different ways to play, for example, the music of Joseph Boulogne, and we're merely proposing one of them. And I think the reason it works so well with Manitoba Chamber Orchestra is that these musicians, as well as being masters of their instruments, are so inquiring, they're so interested, and they're so curious about what we do that we end up having a lot of fun having experiments on how to get as close as we think we can to what Joseph Boulogne might recognize as his own music, were he to walk in the room.
Yeah. One of the things, too, that often happens with a historically informed performance is that the tools that are used are different. For instance, the bows. It's not like you arrive at the MCO and you start doling out bows to all of the string players, right? I mean, they keep with their current instruments. It's just that idea of the musical gesture and like you say, that curiosity and that conviction that is really the driving force behind a sort of well, not a historically informed performance, but kind of really embracing that attitude, right?
Yeah. It's an attitude, and I think the attitude of enthusiasm and embracing these historically informed performing techniques really brings the music a sense of immediacy that it might not have if you don't take those into account. Like I treat the old music like I treat the new music.
Yeah.
You know, I love the same intensity and the same curiosity to the Boulogne as I do to Chris Dirkson's piece. But the great thing is that when we're playing Chris Dirkson's piece, I can actually ask her opinion.
Yeah.
I don't have to imagine. It's really great. Yeah, she always has something helpful and interesting to say.
So if you're just tuning in, my name is Simon Rusnak, and I'm chatting with violinist Aisslinn Nosky, who's in town to perform alongside the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra. We were just chatting about that Chris Dirkson piece. There's also music of Telemann, Boulogne, and Boccherini on the program. You were talking about the role of the concertmaster historically, being an administrator. Did you have any hand in the programming for this concert, or is this the doing of the MCO?
We definitely thought of it together. They were already very aware of Chris Dirkson because she's a fantastic composer and very busy and very prominent, and deservedly so. And so they proposed the idea of having her in to do something. I was thrilled. I was worried she might be too busy. I was delighted that she was interested. And then they asked me to suggest some things that might pair well with it, to contrast. And so I suggested some of my favorite works by those other three composers. Telemann, I could play any time. It's just wonderful music. Boulogne is not as well known as he should be, and the Boccherini is just a real barn burner. So
let's unpack those three fellas a little bit more. Then you mentioned the Boulogne, not as well known as he should be. The Chevalier de Saint-Georges, all sorts of titles in his name. A very fascinating individual. Can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Yeah, he was a very prominent musician in the 18th century. He rose to really great heights of fame in Paris, where he hung out with very famous composers. Gluck, you might have heard of Mozart. We don't have a documented meeting, but it's just unlikely that they wouldn't have met. They certainly knew of each other. Joseph Boulogne was apparently one of the best violinists in all of Europe, and actually he was more famous in his own day for his fencing abilities. He was apparently the scariest person when he picked up a sword, and he had won a lot of military honors, and he at one point was actually considered to take over one of the the highest positions as a musician in France, or in Paris at the time, one of the opera companies, but it didn't work out. And there's a movie coming out this month called,
I was going to mention it. I'm so glad you brought it up. Yeah. It premiered at TIFF. It's going to have its big release. It's U.S.
soon,
release on Searchlight. Yeah, called Chevalier. You watched the trailer?
Well, I've watched the trailer. I mean, it looks fantastic. Of course, I'm going to watch it. I will just say I'm pretty sure there was no violin duel between Saint-Georges and Mozart, but it's nice to imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a little bit of an artistic license there, but it's getting the Amadeus treatment, let's say. But it looks like a really cool movie, and rightfully so, because his life reads like it should be some sort of biopic drama, which is exactly what's been done here. Yeah. There's also music of Telemann on the program, La Pizzara or La Pizzare, depending on how you're pronouncing it. I have to say, though, it's not all too bizarre, or is that just my 20th, 21st century years talking?
No. It's definitely not that bizarre. I'd say it's fun and tuneful. I think the bizarre, giving subtitles to those kind of works, these dance suites, was, I think, a sales tactic.
It was a publisher move?
Yeah, I think so. And so I think there's a few compositional techniques that are a little unusual. That might be why he called it somebody. Actually, we don't even know if the name is from Telemann, but he was trying to sell copy. He was a very savvy businessman.
He
made a lot of money publishing music, which was not easy to do at that time.
And a predominantly self-taught composer too, which is just wild to think of. I mean, just such an incredible talent. And there's just so much fun in his music.
Yeah, buddies with Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yeah, good buddies.
Friends. Yeah, not a lot of people could say that at the time.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? And then the last composer on the program, Boccherini, speaking of subtitles, La Casa del Diavolo. Very evocative. Apparently inspired by a Gluck ballet. Is that?
That's right. Yeah. The movement. There's a movement. The third movement of the symphony is almost. There's an exact quote. I'm not going to say stealing because copyright didn't exist in those days.
Yeah.
People did actually borrow material from each other. So the main theme of the last movement is from a Gluck opera, and that's apparently where the House of the Devil subtitle comes from. It's a very Sturm und Drang, very dark, very stormy, exciting work. And I think we can't quite put the title to Boccherini, but it is commonly. The symphony is commonly known as that. It's one of the few symphonies he wrote in a minor key.
Yeah.
So it's very stormy.
Very stormy. And it sounds like it's going to be an absolutely fantastic program. Aisslinn, so appreciate you taking the time to come by the studio early this morning to tell us a little bit more about it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You can see Aisslinn Nosky alongside Chris Dirksen with the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra today. 2 shows, 1 p.m. a matinee and a 7:30 evening performance taking place at Crescent Arts Centre, the Crescent Fort Rouge United Church. Tickets available through themco.ca or by calling the MCO ticket line or by giving me a call on the Classic 107 contest line, as I've got a couple pairs of tickets for this evening's performance. 204-336-1071. Thanks again, Aisslinn.